Hi everyone, welcome to Fantasy Fiction Focus. Today we are talking to Judith Starkston, all the way from Phoenix, Arizona, who's going to tell us all about her wonderful book. Now, what's this book called again?
It's called Hand of Fire. It's set within the Trojan War, and unlike many versions of it, it tells the story through a woman's eyes, and not the famous Helen, but the much less famous but far more interesting Briseis, the woman that Achilles took captive.
So is this classed as, this is historical fiction? It's not a fantasy, you're basically using real characters to tell the story, I guess.
It's a combination of historical fiction. I created the history of that world very carefully from the archaeology and known facts. But because these are characters who are also mythological and, well, for example, one of the main characters, Achilles, his mother is a goddess. And I fully believe in letting mythology be mythology. I don't rationalize it. These people at that time believed in the gods walking on the earth, and they could meet with them, and that was their worldview, and I keep that. So they're very fantastical things that happen from our point of view, but not really so fantastical from the point of view of the characters in there. So I suppose if you were an ancient Greek, you wouldn't view it as fantasy, but as a 21st century reader, yes, I think it is a combination of history and fantasy.
All right, and is this your first book? I should know this from looking at your website, but is this the first one?
Yes, this is my first novel. I have another coming up that should be ready for going out to publishers in a few months.
Okay, and is that on the same sort of theme, Greek myths and things?
It is about, it's a little bit more historical, and it's a mystery rather than this. Hand of Fire is part coming of age and part romance and part war story, but it's not a mystery. But I met, in the process of researching, I met this wonderful queen from this period who would be as famous as Cleopatra, except that she quite literally got buried by the sands of time. Her name's Queen Puduhepa. And she was very bright. We have her judicial decrees and all these other things, and I thought she'd make a great sleuth. So she's solving crimes now.
Okay, what was her name again?
Queen Puduhepa.
Ooh, wow, that's an interesting name. Well, we'll come back to her in a while. That's very interesting. Let me come back to her in a while. That sounds like an interesting thing with this detective story set in the ancient world. But yes. How long is the first one? How long has that been out?
It came out in September 10th of this 2014, so just a few months.
How is it doing so far, or don't you know?
Haven't gotten my royalty checks, but it's doing very well. I have gotten incredibly positive reviews from a wide range of sources, from the sort of standards like Historical Novel Society to readers all over the world. So I've been very pleased, and it's selling well. So everything a writer could hope for.
Now, I'm assuming, I probably shouldn't assume, but I'm assuming that you have always been interested in this sort of genre and time period, because I think you on your website it mentions how much research you've done and travel for this book.
Yes, I had taught, I was trained originally as a classicist, so Greek and Latin literature and history, and I taught for 25 years or so, Greek literature and that sort of thing. When I retired from teaching, I decided I wanted to start writing, and I'd always had this question that had bothered me about the Iliad, which is this long epic poem set in the Trojan War. And while nobody who reads my novel needs to have ever read the Iliad, for me there was this problem, that this woman was taken captive in the poem, and she seems to love the man who took her captive. And given that he's killed her husband and her brothers and turned her into a slave, that, well, it's not a heartwarming courtship story from the beginning. And I wanted to find what the connection between these two people could be. And sometimes people said, oh, it's like Stockholm Syndrome, some ancient version. And I never found that persuasive, because Achilles, the hero who takes her captive, is he's a kind of existential hero who questions why they're fighting. He's the one who challenges the leadership. He's just not a good brainwasher. So I went looking for bonds between these two rather remarkable people.
So, so obviously this is something you've been interested in for quite some time, I would imagine.
Yes.
ancient Greece and the myths and things. What is it that drew you to that originally and everything?
Well, I always loved mythology as a kid, but even more so as an adult. I just find Greek mythology and history, it's the foundation stone that all the things we now understand about our world get started with. And also, it's just incredibly intriguing. I mean, how can you not... for example, one of the themes in my book and in Greek, this particular Greek tradition, is how an immortal mother could bear knowing that her mortal son will die. I mean, every mom and dad, the worst nightmare you have is facing your child's loss. And she knows she's guaranteed that, and then will have to go forever. So those kinds of themes give this richness and depth that if you're just writing about regular old people, they are regular ideas. They're the things we know in our core as human beings, but they're heightened because of this mythology.
Well, I think it's obviously a very common theme for fantasy people, fantasy writers, to use Greek mythology and Norse mythology, I guess, Egyptians, all that sort of stuff. But so it's not going to be. I don't suppose it's going to be going away anytime soon. So are you going to be looking at doing? Using other types of mythology and stories in the future, or you think you'll stick with Greece and what you love?
I'm not likely to go, I mean, into Norse or Northern European, but as I have studied Greek mythology and the Trojan War, I've also discovered that the mythology of the Near East and the ancient Near East is really very integrated. We kind of have this feeling of the East and the West as separate traditions, and that's really a misunderstanding. It's a kind of unfortunate one because it influences a lot of negative political thinking these days too, I think. There's really a much more integrated East-West thinking, and you see that in the mythology. So for example, my queen that that I'm writing about in my mystery, she's actually the queen of an empire a little bit further to the east, but still very much culturally the same. So I use a lot of Hittite myths. Actually, in Hand of Fire, there's the Greek myth of Achilles, and as I read the Hittite mythology, I found what I believe is probably the original story, where the historical warrior, whoever he might have been, that was a key piece of the Achilles legend, and then this immortal mythological element in this Hittite god Telepinu, I joined those two because I think historically they were. But then it gets to be a wonderful mystical connection that for my characters.
Well,
so I use a lot of this.
I noticed that as well. I did some books on star constellations for the educational publishing. I was reading about the Hercules, I think it was, and the connections between Hercules and the legend of Hercules, I guess, and the stories about him, and the stories about Gilgamesh and things, and how all those religious stories and legends and things in the Near East are all, a lot of them are connected to what became Greek myths.
Yes, exactly. In fact, the Gilgamesh story in the great libraries, one of the sources that I used for writing Hand of Fire, these huge libraries of cuneiform tablets that have been dug up in what's now modern Turkey, that were part of the Hittite Empire and surrounding semi-independent kingdoms. And the Gilgamesh legend is in those. That's one of the places we find the manuscripts for that. And as we do these Hittite myths that I use. So
just for those, for the uninformed amongst our viewers, perhaps, where was the Hittite Empire located?
Well, if you imagine yourself in what's now modern Turkey, and if you're on the very far western coast where the Aegean is, that's where Troy is, up where the Dardanelles and the great battles of, Gallipoli and all of that, that's Troy. Then if you go across towards the east, across Turkey, and you're at Ankara, sort of right in the center of what's now Turkey, you go in a car about 2 hours northeast, and there you are in what's now known as Hattusha, the empire, the capital of the empire of the Hittites. But the Hittite Empire spread from that western coast of what's now Turkey, all the way into what is now Syria and down towards through Lebanon and down south. So it was a huge empire at the time. And Troy was a semi-independent kingdom that was usually allied with those Hittites.
Now you have been as well to you travelled a lot in that area, I think, for research for the book in Turkey and presumably Greece as well. Did you for the books?
Yes, I've travelled extensively, really, from the time I was in college, and then in the last few years, I spent 2 extended trips in Greece and Turkey, and Cyprus. I love Cyprus, and I will eventually set a book there. So I went on this last trip. I spent a couple weeks on Cyprus because it's such a beautiful place. But Turkey is full of incredible Bronze Age, which is the period of my novel, Bronze Age ruins and these incredible collections in their museums. And also, one of the things that I wanted to bring to my book is a sense of the landscape. So, for example, the mountains around Troy are very dramatically steep and beautiful. There are these incredible waterfalls there. You peek out at the Aegean off in the distance, and I wanted to really know what that looks like and describe that and put my characters there. Since every building that I describe I'm having to build quite literally from the ground up because they're all ruins now, I wanted some things to come from reality.
So how important do you think it is to get the research right for these books? I'm thinking it is very important, of course, but how important really is it to make sure everything is perfect? I mean, people are going to be looking at your book perhaps and saying, well, that wouldn't have been like that, or that wouldn't have happened, or they wouldn't have used those swords or something. How important is it for you to get it all right?
I take that responsibility very, very deeply inside. I actually had my whole book fact-checked by one of the leading scholars of the period, and his assessment is actually one of the blurbs on my back. He says he sees absolutely nothing wrong with any of the history, and he couldn't put it down and thought it was beautifully written. So, but I think some people will. I think most people come to this period, come to my book without any real knowledge before that, as they should. They don't need to know anything. And it's my responsibility not to fill their head with a bunch of incorrect world. I want to, be the time machine that takes them back there, but then I don't want to land them in some place that fills them with, an incorrect sense. Since most of the archaeology that tells us about this period is very recent. We didn't even know this empire existed, and although Troy was dug in the 19th century, it wasn't properly dug and explored until the mid-20th century, the last 10, 20 years. So all of this is quite new. Most people didn't ever study any of this in school. They couldn't have. It's not in the textbooks. And so I want my first and foremost to be a good story and to be fun, but subtly underneath that, organically woven in, I don't want any bad history. If Achilles raises a sword, I've taken it from a museum collection or from Homer or from some very accurate moment, and it's a correct sword.
So are you an expert on all the weaponry and things as well?
Enough that I'm not my emphasis in this book was less on the war and the battle scenes. I'm not a Bernard Cornwell who has gigantic battle scenes that stretch for pages. There is a lot of, there are cities taken and destroyed, but it's seen through a woman's point of view. So more often than not, unfortunately, there are things like rape that are more of an issue than swords. But there are some very key scenes. Actually, my female character, is not does not shy from lifting a sword when she needs to at various times. So I knew I had to find out what was true, what really would. Unfortunately, that all comes from rather scanty archaeological records. And so, putting it together is a very careful project. And one imaginative writer might put it together slightly differently than another one. But I think for the most part, I got those things right.
Now, your next one, of course, also a female character, and one that has been, I suppose, ignored perhaps, or little known by historians and writers. So tell us a little bit about this one. Is this in? Are you working on this right now? It's not ready yet.
Yes, I'm working on it right now. It's got a couple more scenes for a rough draft, and then I'll go through and do a clean sweep edit. That usually takes usually a couple clean sweep edits before a novel's finished for me. But she is a historical character. She starts out, when she steps onto the stage as we know her, she is a 15-year-old young woman. That's a grown woman in the ancient world. She's ready for marriage. And she is a priestess of Ishtar. And Ishtar is an interesting goddess. She's a bit like Aphrodite. She's a goddess of love, but she's also like, she's a goddess of war also. So she's this very conflicting duality, and obviously very powerful. And Puduhepa meets somewhat by chance the youngest brother of the great king of the Hittite Empire. He has just come from a successful battle against Pharaoh Rameses II, who is probably the one character in all of this that most people recognize. He's the Pharaoh of Moses and all of that. So that's the period. This younger brother is one of the generals of his brother's army, and he has defeated Ramses. Although amusingly enough, Ramses goes back to Egypt and portrays this as a great, on the walls of the temples and his palace, it's portrayed as a great victory. But we know since the Hittites took all the land and the cities and the Egyptians lost territory, they could not possibly have won the war. So we know that Ramses has developed a revised version by the time he gets home so that his kingdom doesn't think he's a loser. But she, anyway, meets Hattusili when he comes back from that victory and is making offerings to Ishtar. And they are famously report that Ishtar comes to them in dreams and tells them that they must marry, and they do. And they go on to rule for another 60 years together.
Don't tell us any more then about that, so other people might be stealing all your ideas. We don't want to do that. Not before it comes out. Now, so which reminds me as well. How are you promoting the existing book quite a lot? Obviously, you have a website and social media and all the other good stuff like that. What else are you doing to sort of get this noticed and get people to find out about it?
When I first came out, I had before it came out, I organized a blog tour around various bloggers and reviewers around the historical fiction and fantasy world. This weekend, for example, there's a Greek festival near my home, and they invited me to come and talk about my book at various points during the festival, and that's great fun. I actually really enjoy coming to Greek Orthodox churches and talking, because it's Greek history, they really love it. That's been one of my most enjoyable environments. In March, the Tucson Book Festival, which is the third largest in the country, there's usually about 150,000 people there. I'll be moderating several panels there and signing my book in the booth you mentioned earlier when we were chatting before we were live about Sisters in Crime. You wanted to know. There's this wonderful organization for women writers of mystery and crime, excuse me, but also any kind of writer. It started as an organization because women crime writers got very little coverage in the press. That's slightly less true now, but still somewhat true. We actually have a lot of men who join Sisters in Crime because it's such a supportive, good national organization. And one of the ways they support their writers is that they fund a booth at the Tucson Festival of Books each year for people like me who are members to come and have a signing slot. I've run that booth for a number of years. This year I handed it off to someone else since I have my own book to promote. So that's a lot of fun, to meet with readers and be there, and people come up and you chat about your book and they buy it and sign it and you sign it. And
I think people with first books as well, sometimes people aren't quite aware of all that, how much of that stuff is involved with book signings and everything. I think everyone knows now they have to have a website and social media is important, but I think some people still think, well, I'm going to publish my book and the publisher's going to take care of all that publicity, and I just sit back and rake in the cash. But
no, no, that publishers don't do all that much for a writer if you don't go out. I love to speak and do public speaking. I enjoy. Well, I taught for 30 years, so to me, having a crowd and being able to chat about my book is great fun, and I do a lot of that. But online, I do a lot of that too. So
you said you were a teacher. Yeah, well, that's your sort of background and everything. Do you do any teaching now at all? Just like even just like in the community or anything?
Actually, next week I'm teaching a class, and it looks like I have 100 students signed up, so it's a large class. It's called The Forgotten Kingdom, about the Hittites, and I love doing that. So it's a class that's actually for run by the community college system for mostly retired people. They come and take as many classes as they want for a set fee. So that's a lot of fun. That's a kind of continuing education. I don't teach high school very often anymore. The university, Arizona State University, has a good outreach program, and I ran a series of workshops on cuneiform tablets and like the clothing and how I designed the clothing for my book so that it was historically accurate with high school students there. So I get a chance to get my hand into teaching once in a while, but full-time I'm a writer these days. I spend about 8 to 10 hours a day writing.
Well, that's great. I mean, I think it's important if you've got the knowledge and people are interested in hearing about it. That's great. Then I suppose do you get ideas or inspiration from the people in the classes too?
Yes, it's lots of fun. A lot of times, actually, one of the things they give me great ideas about is how to pitch my book more successfully. I mean, they'll ask a question and I'll realize, how could I have assumed that or not? So it's great. It's also great for writing because you realize what appeals to somebody, what they really liked about what I've said, and then that goes right into the next book. And so, yeah, I love it.
Well, it certainly seems that you've got a very popular genre here, I think. I don't think there's going to be any problem with people being interested in the book and everything. So, so now where can people find Hand of Fire? Where can people find it? I'm presuming on Amazon and things.
Yes, Amazon and, iTunes Store. It's a paperback and ebook. You can go into any bookstore and order it if it's not on the shelf. It's a small press, so the chances are it won't be on the shelf, but it's distributed through Ingram, which is the big, huge, international distribution for all bookstores. So it's very, very readily accessible. Pretty much anywhere online. You could go onto your favorite bookstore's online catalog and order it in a heartbeat. So it's there for everybody.
Excellent. Well, so it's available, and obviously you can come and find out more about you on your website and Facebook and all the other things. So I think that people will enjoy finding out more about that and the book, and hopefully people are going to buy it in droves in the coming weeks and months and years, I suppose, for now. And then they'll be looking forward to the new one about the mysterious detective in the Hittite Empire.
There will also eventually be a sequel to Hand of Fire that carries on with these particular characters, but I worked on a different novel in between, so I'll run 2 series simultaneously.
Well, that's just it. People always say, well, when's your next book coming out? People, I think, don't understand that these things have to be written.
Yes, they take a while.
Especially ones like yours with all the research involved. And unfortunately for you, you would have to travel to exotic locations to do research again.
I know, it's a terrible, terrible thing, isn't it, to have to travel to wonderful exotic places.
Well, I'll tell you what then, Judith. Well, thank you very much for joining us at Fantasy Fiction Focus. It's been great having you on here, and I wish you all the best with the book in the coming year, and of course with the new one that you're still working on. So, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you.